Hello, everyone. This is Ed Breniger, and this is the Eddie Network podcast. And my guest today is Peter Laughter, a gentleman who is, for lack of a better word, the perfect word, is in transition. And the transition he is in is on many levels and in many ways that align with many of the things that I've been thinking about for a long time. So our conversation today is going to be spectacular because there is much for us to find is in similarity of the way we think. So welcome, Peter. Give us a little idea of kind of the course of your life over the last several years, and that way kind of helps us kind of understand why these areas of interest to you become so important.
So I was an entrepreneur in the recruiting and staffing industry for the vast majority of my career. And for wide stretches of that career, that was very successful, but it became more and more difficult for me as recruiting is broken. It deploys this really simple process of buying stuff to the immensely complex process of engaging with other human beings. And in the process, everyone is dissatisfied. And I had an experience, and as that became clear to me over time, along that journey, I had an experience working on the board of a Quaker school that was looking to separately incorporate from the Quaker religious institution that technically owned them, only though that was a name only. And it was a difficult process. There was a lot of conflict and a lot of really difficult, prickly feelings about it. People were very angry, and we used a very open process about listening carefully and incorporating people's objections into our way of moving forward. And it took a long time. It took about 2 years, but I remember, throughout that process, in the beginning when I started, people were behaving really awfully. They would, in our quarterly meetings, they would stand up and say these horrible things about board members, about how they were not trustworthy and they were going for other interests. And I remember I would be sitting 5 feet away from someone who would be saying these horrible things about me. And I would be like, you realize that I was appointed to this board by this very body. Like it was like, you chose me to do this. I'm definitely not the horrible person that this person is saying I am. And I joined the process with the realization, this negotiation, with the realization that I knew a lot of the people who were so angry and who were throwing these emotional Molotov cocktails. I grew up with their children, and I thought, oh, I'm the perfect person to politic, to manipulate, to play people's interest off each other. And my dear friend and mentor, Alice, who is heading up that initiative, welcomed my efforts, but made it clear that we weren't going to do any of the things that I was offering. And instead, we listened and listened profoundly, not to convince or cajole or to manipulate, but really to understand and see common ground in ways that we wouldn't, and even called on us to adopt things that we thought were absolutely insane. But because we were able to see the brilliance in it and our connection. But in doing so, we gained a listening that we never would have had in a standard negotiation. And it really was quickly transformed from a negotiation into a partnership. And I remember this guy, John, very Quaker looking man with a long beard. He even sometimes wore a funny hat. And but he was at the meeting where our articles of separation were approved. John said, "I love this document. It is so beautiful." And he was one of the people who was behaving so badly at the beginning of the process. And I walked out of that meeting thinking, my God, what did we just do? And if we accomplish this, surely we can cure the world of its ills.
Mm-hmm.
And not long after that, and I started studying Quaker businesses, and Cadbury, for example, had been run using Quaker decision-making process up until the point it went public and then was subsequently taken over by Kraft. And was really interested in that. And then I was facing an intractable problem in my business. We had great reviews on Google and City Search, 5 stars, and we were reviewed primarily by the consultants that we would just chose to represent. And then Yelp came around, and the type of people like our consultants who was reviewing us, who basically were not reviewing a lot of services, because they weren't reviewing a lot, their opinions and their reviews were ignored. And the people whose opinions were prioritized are people who reviewed a lot, which tended to correlate with the people that we neglected to represent. And they had a very good reason to be angry with us, and they were, because we were not deciding not to employ them and ghosting them for it. And I'm embarrassed to say it looking back, but I had constructed a very, very good justification for doing that. And it was because we would tell them when they were in our office and they didn't do well on our assessments, and they would have a tantrum in the middle of our office, and it would be horribly disruptive. So we started sending them letters and emails, and then they would call up and have a tantrum, and it would be very difficult for the people answering the phone. So we just stopped communicating, and we justified it through that. And it was very clear from the reviews that we were getting that that was the source of the problem. And I had come up with a very convoluted, expensive, painful solution to this problem that was dead wrong. And I had a group of people who were working on it as well. And they came up with a really simple solution. We need to tell people that we're not going to be representing them. And I was insistent that that was wrong, because I had all this evidence that that people would throw tantrums. And my assistant, Becky, at the time, was working with this team of people. And she said, got in my face and said, Peter, what you're suggesting was a violation of our core values. And I was powerless against that accusation. One, it was right. But two, I had done so much to empower core values that I really was helpless to countermand her direction because of that. And I very sleazily decided to let her solution go forward, knowing that it would fail, and we would just pick up with my very bad, poorly designed solution when it did. Well, and I'm sure you can imagine that her solution worked perfectly. And what she realized is that we weren't really managing people's expectations before they came in. And it was a simple process change, and immediately the bad reviews went away instantly. And I realized in that moment that I had been wrong about what leadership was. And I thought leadership was about having the vision, about having the answer, about being the smartest person in the room, about being able to point to the direction and say, let's go here. And in that moment, I realized that leadership is about none of those things. It was, and the truth of the matter is I was almost never the smartest person in any room that I went into. And the pressure of pretending to be so was horrible and caused all sorts of insecurities. And what I realized is that no, my job as a leader is to make sure that the environment is such that the best ideas can be spoken and unveiled. And when they were, that they could be recognized, that their brilliance could be recognized and quickly acted upon. And that was so radically different than anything that I had been taught or had thought before. And it was so freeing to walk into a room to discuss an intractable problem that I could not solve on my own, that was even beyond my capabilities of solving, and knowing with complete certainty that an answer would emerge and everything would be okay. And all I had to do was make sure people felt comfortable and were able to speak the truth as they saw it, and that people were listening to that. And it changed everything for me. Yeah.
What a remarkable story, and what a remarkable picture that is of the larger world that we exist in. Because everything you've described is what's happening at the largest, on the largest stages that you can imagine.
Very much so.
And it doesn't ever bring us to a point of resolution or peace. whatever you want to, whatever term you're looking for, it never works. And what what I guess what I want to say to you is thank you for being both the foil that forced other people to stand up and say this is what we really want, because you were offering the opposite of it, but even more so the humility to accept that. And that's as great a testimony of leadership as there is, because what I saw about leadership when I first got into studying leadership back in the mid 80s, when I started reading CEO bios, and I said, this is not what leadership is. This is just heroic worship manufacture marketing. And because all the people who had made a difference in my life were teachers, coaches, ministers, people who really didn't have any power or standing in the world. They had their little piece of it, but they just didn't, they weren't out to try to prove something. They were out to make a difference with the people that they were serving.
Well, and I think that's the real interesting thing of this time that we're in, is we're starting to see that really no position comes with power or authority, that is something that's fluid. And even the most quote unquote powerful CEOs, when one of their key executives gives notice, they experience that shift in power, that they no longer have the power, that person giving notice is the one who is in power. And I think it is this understanding that by its very nature, power and authority are fluid and dynamic, and they're constantly moving. And it is the ability to recognize those shifts that allow for leadership to happen. And it is not the holding on to power.
So what I want to understand, I want to get to the core of what this idea of listening is, because my experience is, I built a lot of work I do on listening. So I'm listening, but I also know that I'm listening in order to respond. And you're saying we're listening not to do that. We're not listening to in anticipation of speaking. We're just listening, and we're going to process this. Are we processing this separately from the group? And unpack some of this idea of this listening, because this is a topic that continues to come up here on the podcast and in my conversations outside of this. And so this is really important and very, really valuable for us.
So I will start with how this is done in a Quaker context. Mm-hmm. And the truth of the matter is I don't have the answer that you're looking for. I'm still looking for it myself. But in Quaker business process, we have the role of a clerk. And the clerk is the one who is running the meeting, who is setting the agenda, who is making sure that the meeting is run orderly, that people get a chance to speak, that primarily people only speak one time before everyone who desires to speak has a chance to speak, and will settle the meeting down when necessary. Now, the one difference is the clerk does not participate in the meeting. The clerk has a very, very specific job outside of what I've just described, is to listen to the truth that is emerging from the discussions. And when they hear that truth, they name it. This is what I hear emerging. And when that is a way forward, the participants in that meeting will also be able to recognize it and say, yes, that's the way forward, or wrestle with it until that greater truth emerges. And I found real power in that, and so in those moments where as a chief executive, where I would walk into a meeting to discuss an intractable problem, Well, I already knew I didn't have the answer, right? And I wasn't the smartest person in that room. So it was very easy for me to let go of this listening to respond because I was really listening for what is the answer here. I don't know what it is, but I did know that the very brilliant people who were in the room with me would come up with it, and it might be that, you know, that thou said a part of it, and that inspired Abby to say another part of it, which inspired, Rose to say another part of it. Yeah, sure, that's how it will work, but it will be merged, and so that was really how I started doing it. But honestly, I mean, I think, as I'm moving into a new business that I'm much more involved and opinionated on, that's going to be much different. And I have to be very careful with how I manage that.
So,
Yeah.
so in this process of listening is, I mean, you have the clerk's role. I hear that, but is there someone who is facilitating this in 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 watching the is kind of the protector of the process and not of the outcome, but of the process, so that there is certainty that everyone is heard. For example, is there a person who has that role?
Yeah, that would be the clerk, but the clerk
That
is
would be
not really interested in a solution. The
right.
clerk is committed to yeah, and the belief is through being faithful to the process that the answer will emerge, and that is the base understanding of that particular process.
It's
So
this is so interesting because I've done a lot of this kind of work with churches, and churches have the tendency to get stuck in trying to maintain a loyalty to a particular point in time of their life as a church where they view that as kind of the golden era or the best, these were our best years. And so we had discovered what we want and there, so we're going to protect that without realizing that, the values and the context kept changing. And so the process that, it wasn't created by me, but the process I used was, we would put flip chart paper up on the wall and we put three timelines: personal, church, and community. And the timeline would begin with the founding of the church. So whenever that year was, and then everything going forward, then there would be a line for today, and then there would be a decade after that on these timelines. And we gave everybody post-it notes, and they would write down um, events, things, whatever they wanted, and then they would go put it up at the point in time where these things happened, and then this would take probably 45 minutes to do, and then I would go through and I just walk down the timelines and speak what I saw. So tell me about this. Tell me about this. And what it accomplished was all the silent people got to speak. And sometimes that was so powerful because they had been watching and they had been listening, but they had never had the vehicle for being able to speak. And so that, it's another way of talking about it. The extroverts were always the ones who were dominating the conversation, and the introverts didn't know how to interrupt in a polite way because they're polite people, and so this was a way of getting at that. And it was always amazing. I worked with this one church that had the whole community had changed economically overnight from being a farm community, ranching community, to being an energy sector community. And the church had never figured out how to adapt to that change. And so you look at the timelines, and all the, 80% of the post-it notes were on the personal side, very little on the church, very little on the community. So they were really detached not only from their community, but from their church as well.
and from each other, I would imagine. Yeah.
Therefore, and from each
Yeah.
other. That's exactly right. it was a fascinating thing. I'd never seen that before. And to be able to point that out to them was, oh, well, why is that? And I said, well, how far back do we have to go to when you all were very congruent with your church? And oh, that was when we're all farm families, is what we are, all ranchers. And we just don't understand the oil sector. So I mean, that's a kind of interesting
Yeah.
way of this thing unfolding. And the fact that we can have these conversations really is very important for the future of our families and our communities and our world.
Very much so. Yeah, and I'm curious, you mentioned that you the change that you feel that we're going into. I'm sure it's the same change that I am hoping to prepare people and organizations for. But I'd love to hear what you see coming.
Well, I'm going to go back almost 25 years, and I saw the end of the modern hierarchical organization because it wasn't functioning well, and people were simply parts of a machine. But no one who is in charge of those things is going to go and say, "Oh, we're not really a machine. We're really a community. So we're going to take this whole machine apart, and we're going to." No, it has to collapse. It has to fail. It has to fall apart. And slowly, people have been getting the idea that we need to be in relationship with one another, and that leadership is not a role or a title, but actually how we function. And it's a behavior, it's a choice, and it's a choice to make a difference, and it's a choice to join others in making a difference. I mean, this is why your story is so I don't know, it's so great to me because it's a picture of what I see, what I've been seeing for decades, and and the and we reached that point of that inflection point where things really began to change with COVID, and where they realized all these people that are in charge really don't care about us.
Yeah.
Not only do they not care, but they've been exploiting us. And do I want to be an exploited worker for the rest of my life? No. What do I do with that? I don't know what to do with that. But I am now in that liminal space of transition that I now get to decide who I want to be in the future. And you're in that space right now. You're making.
Oh, very much so. Oh, you're just getting the start of it too. I'm, and we've sold our house and are going to be traveling to find our next community over the next 6 months. And now, as I'm exploring this new career that I'm stepping into. Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about that, because a lot of the conversations I have here are about these transitions that we go through.
Well, so I mentioned I was an entrepreneur in the recruiting and staffing industry. And in the beginning, that was very exciting and I was very good at and very, very successful. But the problem is, and this started to manifest around probably 2000 and really around 2002 or three, when your product is people, it is a very easy jump to start viewing people as product. And in fact, that is what is wrong with the recruiting industry. We take this very simple process of buying stuff and we apply it to the immensely complex process of engaging with other human beings. And in doing so, everyone involved in the process is miserable. Hiring managers hate it. Recruiters are struggling and they hate it. Applicants hate it. Yeah, everyone is miserable and it's producing horrible results pretty consistently. I mean, 40% of all people hired don't make it past their first year. I mean, that's just the waste involved in that, and the suffering that is caused by that is just immense. And I left the recruiting industry in 2020. There was a consulting firm that was doing work in this distributed leadership space, and I was very interested. And they were a super smart group of folks. They were very dysfunctional in the way that they ran their business. They had no sense of planning, and they were allergic to planning. So they'd get into all these arguments about whether or not they were moving fast or slow, and I was like, you have no plan, you have no benchmark to be able to tell if you are moving fast or slow. And I kept trying to institute a planning process. I think the founder was really addicted to jumping from opportunity to opportunity. And he, just, undermined that process. And I realized, oh, I'm never going to be able to bring my gifts here. And I left, and I looked at starting a business. And this was in right after the first quarter of 2022. And I had been experimenting with several businesses to hold me up until then. I had started a coaching company helping senior executives who dread going to work in the morning and want more for the last stretch of their career, and loved that work as coaching. I hated selling myself as a coach. And my assumption is that it would be mostly education and maybe 20 to 30% coaching. And it was more like 80% coaching and 20% education. So I couldn't scale it. It was just me. And I really disliked selling myself as a coach. It was too much about me. And I usually in sales, I have, buy it, don't buy it. I'm totally fine. Obviously, I want you to buy it, but what I really want is for you to make the right decision for yourself and your company. And when I'm selling a product or a service, that's very easy. But when I was the product, it was very hard for me to do. And
Understand.
yeah, and so I just didn't like it. And then I had this question, maybe there's something at the intersection of helping organizations find and articulate their purpose, something that I'm very good at, and storytelling, which is another big part of what I do, that can fix what's broken about recruiting. And I, at the time, had this intuitive sense that it would, and I quickly threw up a website, which I immediately hated, and then took a step back and took some consulting jobs in the executive recruiting space while I figured it out. And I started just interviewing CEOs and private equity executives and senior, HR professionals. And I really saw clearly that dynamic that I was mentioning before, that we apply this simple process of buying stuff to this immensely complicated process of engaging with human beings, and saw where the critical problems and that were manifesting, and came up with a way for companies to get their most valued employees to tell the stories that emanate from the narrative themes that naturally come from things like purpose and values and culture, and tell those stories on platforms like LinkedIn with the knowledge of the people who share those values and purpose and desire that culture will engage with that material. And then looking at who's engaging, you can see, oh, this person is likely to have the skills that we need, and then create authentic relationships with those people, so that when it's time to hire, you have a group of 5 to 15 people who know you, are likely to be a match for your organization's culture and are likely to have the skills you're looking for. And you'd have a conversation. Ed, you and I have been talking for a while. We like each other. We see the world in a similar way. And I know that you have this plan to do this really cool thing with your career, but we have an opening, and I think we might be able to get you there faster. Should we talk? Would create a very different response. And I started working on that business, and it was very exciting, but it was confusing. And randomly, I had an opportunity to speak about it. And and I got paid to speak, and it was great, and it was fun. And I'm a storyteller, and I have a TEDx talk I did on a concept a while ago. So I'm used to being on stage, and I thought this was great, and I really loved it. And so I started exploring speaking. And as I got deeper into it, I saw some things about my ability and the potential of me in that industry. And then I also realized that my recruiting business was a stepping stone to what I really most wanted to do. And I'm 53 years old. I don't have a lot of time for stepping stones, but I also realized that the very act of speaking gives one an outsized voice and credibility. And I realized, so if I'm working on this speaking career, I should be speaking about what I'm most passionate about, is really about how we are entering this time of intense complexity and rapid change and innovation. And I was clear, and I remain even more so now that I've researched it, that this standard command and control orthodoxy that has been the dominant philosophy for running organizations for hundreds of years, if not millennia, is just wholly unequipped to manage this time. And I really do believe that we as a society are on a razor's edge. We have intractable problems that we as a species face that require nothing more than collaboration to solve. And I mean, the climate crisis is a perfect example. We do not need new technologies at all. We do not need new technologies to stop emitting carbon. We do not need new technology to reduce the carbon load in our environment as it is. All of those technologies exist today. It is a question of, can we collaborate to the extent to implement those existing technologies so that they can make a difference in time? But yet, clearly, we do not know how to collaborate. And it occurred to me that if we can have the workplace be the center where people learn to collaborate as this integral part of how people earn their daily bread, then it will become part of who they are. And they will bring that spirit of collaboration to their families, to their neighborhoods, to their institutions, to their faith communities, and to their politics. And it will spread from that point of view. And this concept of division that has been artificially created, you versus me, is not the model. It is you and me versus the problem. And if we can start to recognize that construct, then that is really the answer we need to save our species and planet. And I wanted to be part of that. Yeah.
And I would take all of this a step further and say that all our perceptions of the world, whether what is positive, what's negative, what is the crisis, what is the solution, are now broken and out of balance and irreparably flawed, so that all these campaigns to fix things are only, as you have already said, going to make things worse. And that the thing which is so interesting to me is that what it is actually leading to is all these really nice people who have been rule followers in their organizations are beginning to resist being manipulated, being exploited, and they want to be in relationship with each other. And they want to collaborate, and they want to be able to share. They want to be able to share a common purpose and a common set of values. They want these things because it is actually who we are as human beings. And so this massive transition we're in is not simply a technological transition. It's a transition at a very deep philosophical level. And that
it is an evolutionary transition.
That's right.
Yeah, and I really do agree with you. In 2015, 2015, I had a TEDx talk that I gave called Radical Empathy. And it was really looking at, this issue of conflict. And the realization that had me, I really tell the story of working with my mother who had a condition called borderline personality disorder. And when people got close to that part of her that was broken, she would viciously attack. And that was normal for most of my life. And when I realized that, oh, this is likely a symptom of this disease that she has, it suddenly stopped having to react to her bad behavior, which would send me into a tizzy that would last for days. And I just stopped reacting to it. And I was able to just sidestep it and say, hey, what's going on here? And I, through that, identify where it is that she was feeling threatened and address that. And everything went away. And in doing so, I was able to actually have a relationship with my mother that was serviceable. And it was remarkable. And then in the middle of a fight with my wife, I realized that the fight came from her feeling insecure and me pushing stupidly or without being sensitive. And she just lashed out because she felt that she was backed up against the wall. And I have this thought, well, what if our assumption is that our natural state as humans is one of deep connection and relation. And any evidence of the contrary is a sign of dis-ease. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, if we can hold that, we would react to conflict very differently. And that has been a real driving understanding. And it was such a magical realization. It came the time that my daughter was, she's 21 now. She was, about 12, 13. And, she went through this phrase of fighting almost everything that we would say. Well, what occurred to me is I realized, oh, she hears everything I say as criticism. Yeah. And of course, she's reacting badly. And it gave me the room to have room for my daughter to be a preteen
Right.
and be able to speak to that, and throughout this time, be able to build this really magical relationship with my daughter, which exists today. Never perfect, mind you, but we have this ability to conflict, quite well.
Yeah, I went through. I didn't go through maybe at the extreme level that you did, but had this experience with my children. And early enough, I realized that I needed not to treat them as children, but treat them as adults. And instead of challenging them and correcting them, I said, "Oh, we talk through whatever it is." And as a result, they're very independent and they don't listen to me. No, they do listen. They don't, but they don't listen to me as if I have the answer. They know that I don't have the answer. And they know that they don't have the answer for the most part. But you see, this is, I think, is the emerging thing that's coming, because we need this um, almost at the level of survival in order, just at a very personal level, and I'm working on I've begun to work on the follow-up book to my book Circle of Impact, and this is the stuff that I'm kind of wrestling with. Oh, where do I take all these fragments of thoughts and coalesce them into something whole, and that hasn't appeared yet, but someday it will, and then we'll write the book.
It is my belief that a lot of this social change and this understanding of shifting our model of listening and conflict will actually come through business. And the insight that I had is, business has been broken for 20 years, and there's 70% of large scale transformations within corporate transformations end in failure. Digital transformation, merger integration, all of it, 70%. That's a number that's been known for 20 years and has not changed in 20 years. 78% of the working population is significantly dissatisfied with their work. It is, with, about 20% of the working population was actively dissatisfied. The waste involved in that is immense. Next year, U.S. companies will spend $1 trillion on digital transformation, knowing full well that 70% of those dollars will be wasted.
Wow.
And the problem is our, and I don't like to bash the word hierarchy, because I actually don't think there's anything wrong with hierarchy, but it is really the command and control orthodoxy that lends itself very well to hierarchy. Is what's problematic. And I think we are coming to what I call a Deming moment when it comes to command and control, because things will move too quickly for that model of leadership to survive. It just will not be able to survive. And I think the social pressures that you're talking to are adding a push to this change. The Great Resignation, quiet quitting, all of those movements have been fueled by two very specific desires. People want meaning and they want agency. And that is, those two things, meaning and agency, are actually the solution.
And they want a connection to something or someone that's outside of who they are. And I would say that they need a grounding in reality. And the problem is that the way business has been done and the way philosophy has been done over the last 50 years has been to deny reality and say, well, reality is what you perceive it. Well, no, reality is that slap in the face that comes when you get fired and you have a mortgage to pay the next month.
Yep.
And you didn't get a severance. That's what reality is. And so, when people say, so what's your advice? I say, watch your money. I don't care anything about anything else. If you just watch your money, you'll begin to make the right decisions about how do you go through these transitions. And so you're entering into a transition. I mean, and you're in that age group. You've been in kind of in a transition for a while. So it started in your 40s, and you're still
It
in.
did. I don't move fast. Yeah.
And that's where a lot of the major transitions that people go through begin in their 40s. It did for me, and it's going for you. So tell us a little bit about how you and your wife are approaching the decision about who you want to be for the next 30 years, let's say.
Well, it was really interesting because my wife had been dissatisfied with New York. She stopped, enjoying it. Everyone's so busy, so it's really hard to, have friends who say, "Yeah, let's do something, tomorrow." Everyone is just, crazed and running around, and the rat problem has been horrible. You can't see it, but there's a backyard this way that we have completely abandoned because the rats are just so awful. Yeah, and my wife said, "I'm going to be stuck in and post-pandemic, I think we've got used to being home a lot. So my wife said, if I have to be stuck at home, then I want to be able to look at something beautiful."
Yeah, yeah.
And I thought I love being in the woods, and I had always wanted to have a place to go on the weekends and stay here in New York. But I realized one, just I that was all because I thought I had to live in New York for my career. And that's totally changed. I no longer have to do that. And so we started looking at what type of life do we want. So we started thinking about what is important to us, and we just started that conversation. And so being able to see nature, and I love hiking, so being close to that ability, um, and we we like community, so being close to a small town, is something that was important to us. We wanted to be near about an hour away from a city because I need to be near an airport, but also so my wife can show her paintings and have a little bit of a larger art scene that she can tap into. And I'm also a storyteller, and I tell stories with an organization called The Moth. And they put on these story slams. And so I was looking for a city where there's monthly story slams. So I know, yeah, on average, 8 times a year, I can get access to a stage and tell a story. And our daughter, who is moving into adulthood, we wanted her to feel comfortable there. And she's gay and she looks gay. So, yeah, we were really looking at, at states where she was likely to feel comfortable. And we decided to look outside of Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, Boston, and Denver. And we were reluctant just to randomly pick a place. So we decided to sell our house and just take 6 months and travel around. And so the movers come next Monday, and and we're going to New Hope, Pennsylvania. I am a big part of my next career is public speaking. And I've been taking a course on a 7-month course on public speaking through an organization called Heroic Public Speaking. And I have to be in New Hope, Pennsylvania, which is one of the towns on our list. Anyway, and so that's our first place, and we'll see where we go next. We're thinking of checking out Frederick, Maryland after this, but we'll see.
It sounds great. And before we went on the air, you talked about becoming unencumbered, and that this process of transitioning is also kind of becoming unencumbered by what? What are you becoming unencumbered from?
Well, for me, it was one, just the very um, cathartic process of letting go of the vast majority of my possessions. Right. And, as a Quaker, we have a testimony of simplicity, not because there's something great about simplicity, but we recognize that the more complex our lives are, the more difficult it is to hear that divine guidance that connects us all to each other. And so the process of getting rid of all your stuff, over the next 5 days, everything that you see in my background will be picked up by people who are looking for a new home. And the process of just giving that away has been really joyous. So being unencumbered by that, but also um, being unencumbered by all of these constraints that we thought held us down, and this definition of what our community needs to look like and what we want to see in that um, is something that unencumbered. And then also, but really looking at, and I think you and I are on the same page, all the things that we as a society need to let go to step into this new era of connection, which I believe is coming whether we want it or not. It is just a question of how painful the transition will be. Yeah, but I have no doubt that we will get there, and it might be exceedingly painful, or it might be very, very easy. My hope is for the latter, incidentally. Yeah, um, but yeah, and there's a lot that we need to let go of, yeah, in order to make that transition.
I totally understand that, and I went through beginning in it's 2009, 2010, what a season that I call the three losses, and one was the ending of my consulting practice because nobody wanted to do what I was doing, and then I took on a nonprofit, and after 18 months they fired me because I expected the board to give money, and they didn't want to give money, and so they got rid of me, and they had to close it down because they didn't give any money. I mean, it's another lesson of the time we're in. And then my marriage of 30 years ended, and so I'm a Presbyterian minister, so I took on a church for 2 years, part time, and he convinced me that's not what I'm supposed to be doing. I had a lovely time doing it. I love the people that I was working with, but it really is, it's far too much of an administrative kind of role, and you can't. I just couldn't make the connection for them to move from loving me to doing what I'm suggesting that they do, to actually activation. That just that wasn't where my skills were.
Yeah.
So I moved to Jackson Hole, Wyoming, spent 6 years there, wrote a book, and totally changed everything. And then I realized that a section of my life was over, and I ended up moving back to North Carolina in the beginning of the pandemic and fall of that 2020. And now, and I was in a small town for 3 years. I liked being there, but it was not going to lead me anywhere. I like the people there. I really, and if I was retiring in the sense of I'm going to stick my feet up on the porch rail and talk to friends as they walk by, that would be perfect. But that's not who I was. So I've ended up buying a house in my hometown of Winston-Salem, and I bought a 5-bedroom house downtown, 100 years old, so that I could create an environment for people to come and talk like we're talking. And it'll eventually have a sign that'll call it the Eddie House, and it'll allow me to put my library into a way that I've never had it, and it'll be where I can live for the rest of my life and have a way of having this conversation, unscripted conversations where people can come in and just talk about what they want to talk about, and maybe even do some art stuff here. Have some art students who are say play the cello or the violin or the flute. They come in and they can do some little concerts, little salon concerts. So that kind of transition for me is very personal, but it's also very relational. It's all about how do I put myself in a position where I can build relationships across a range of generations, not just my generation, but generations going now to Gen Alpha, to that generation, and to see what will happen as I move forward. So you and your wife are always welcome to come here and if you come here, then we'll set up an event where you can tell the story. I mean, that's what I can do here. And
Well, Winston-Salem is a great place. I know it well. I've been years since I've been there, but I have some dear friends in Winston-Salem. So
well, let's plan on doing that. Let's we got a couple more minutes. We got a little bit more time. Let's finish by really celebrating what leadership looks like 10 years from now, because I'm interested in where you see these things that are happening, and you used the term earlier before we went on the air of distributed leadership. I think that was the term you used. I want to hear you speak to that, because I think ultimately the people who are watching this and listening to this need to understand that their leadership, in the terms that I talk about, of taking personal initiative to create impact, is very similar to what you're talking about, which is distributed. And wherever they are distributed is where they need to lead.
So I think yes, and I think that is, I think so. I don't have a hard definition of it. I think the core of it is empowering people, is first recognizing that the very nature of power and authority are fluid and that they move, constantly.
Mm-hmm.
And so it is the ability to recognize that. And so in that context, leadership is less about telling people what to do or setting a direction, but really making sure that what I call the container, that the space is there, that people can see what's happening around them and they can understand it and then know how to appropriately react. And that has to happen a lot faster. So people need, frameworks for making decisions, but they do not need permission to make decisions, or they do not need, input on their decisions. They need to work in collaboration with each other, to accomplish that. Because I think the level of complexity of our world right now is immense, and understanding that, we will, all of us have an opportunity to understand the reality that we see, but we do it from a very, very very limited perspective and view. And so our ability to understand can only be increased by hearing what others see, in that perspective. What much of a broad understanding can we gain? And then from that place of understanding, how is it that we can take action that moves us closer to our purpose, in that moment, and to be able to do so very quickly and independently. So I think for some organizations, it will be, small teams working independently in different parts. For larger, more complex organizations, it will be teams of people who have agreements with teams that they're dependent on, and their relationships are based on those agreements rather than any false sense of power or authority. But I think that's one of the realizations that I've had in the work that I'm going into, is I recognize that we are so stuck in our thinking that has been formed by command and control, that is very difficult for us to see the world in a different way. So in 2006, I ran the marathon with Memorial Sloan Kettering's team, and we had a long run, an 18-mile run from the in Manhattan on the West Side, started at the Intrepid Airspace Museum, and we ran all the way up the West Side Highway to the George Washington Bridge, across the bridge into New Jersey, and then back again. And the route was not clear. There were several points where you had to get off a path, and and so they gave us these slips of instructions that were not at all clear. And I was running with a group of people, must have been 18 of us in the beginning. These are all people who are capable of raising $4,000 in 2006 dollars for the pleasure of running 26.2 miles, who can get up at 5 a.m. on a Saturday morning to meet at a group run. These all very accomplished people, but we got to that first turn, no one was willing to say it's this way. And at the time, I thought, oh, people need a leader. They need someone to point to the direction and say this way. And what I've learned subsequently is no, that they didn't need that at all. They were just had the leadership beaten out of them by making the wrong decision one time and being castigated for it.
Paying the price for it forever.
Yeah. And what we've done is we have just eliminated the operational effectiveness of our organizations because people are afraid to speak up, to speak their mind, to say the truth that is so clear to them. And there is no listening for that truth. And so I think it is really in that needs to shift. And I think that's going to look vastly different from organization to organization. But the problem is because we can't imagine it, we have to experience it. And I haven't looked this up yet, but someone told me that the Greek for apocalypse does not mean the end of the world. It means the end of an era, of which the new era cannot be imagined and cannot be conceptualized until it's experienced. And I think that's where we're moving. And so we've grown up in this very command and control environment, and when I see organizations that use distributed leadership effectively, the ones who are most effective at it started off that way, and they had all of this time to experiment, to figure things out, to come up with these structures. And then that want to make that true and take a methodology that someone else has developed and they superimpose it on their organization, usually ending in failure. Well, it's because they didn't go through that period of experimenting. What does work for them? And so, and Jennifer, who introduced us, and I know each other through a community called Strategic Doing, which is all about how do we create those experiments so people can experience working in community, in real community, as opposed to a command and control environment. And once they experience that, they can start to imagine what will work for their particular organization, their industry, their culture, their client base, their marketplace, and create something that is really magnificent. And in most large companies, it won't look the same from silo to silo. I mean, the needs of a research group versus the needs of a sales group are going to be very different. And we need to recognize and have that flexibility in our lives and our institutions.
And what I see is that there is already a memory of this operating, and it exists the further you go away from the authority structure. And the terminology I use is that there is a persistent residual culture of values that persists because it resides in the relationships of the people. And where you have healthy relationships within a business, you're going to find that they have ways of working together to solve problems that no one else knows that's going on because they're doing it in the shadows.
Yep. Yeah, and that's fascinating because it's one of the things that I really hold is most companies, they have everything they need, to make this transition already within the company. Are they paying attention? Right. Are they, able to take care of it? It is, So on the one hand, this is a very simple transition, and on the other, it is incredibly complex. But it's either way, it's going to be a lot of fun.
It is. I hope to live a lot longer. I'm 70, so I'm planning on another 35 years because these next 35 years have been pretty remarkable. So
I would not bet against you making it another 35 years.
Oh yeah, I'm totally motivated because what's happening. Let me just say it this way, Peter. What's happening with this podcast is far beyond what I'd imagined when I started it. I just started it because I just thought it was the time to do it. I'd begun to have people reading my stuff say, well, why don't I just start and then I said, I'm just going to make it easy for people not to say no. So, just give me an hour, there's no agenda. We'll just talk about what we want to talk about. Oh my gosh, what the comments to me about how important an unscripted conversation is. I said, unscripted conversation. I've never heard of that. What is that? That's what you're doing. Really? Oh, wow.
I'm thinking about what you said because people are so desperate for connection. And I have a dear friend, one of the most brilliant people I've ever met, Christina Harbridge, and she taught a communication tool, a connection tool. And it was at an event where she had us all, like two groups of people standing facing each other. And then we all moved, two steps to the right. And so I was across a woman who was, I mean, she must have been a model. She was about 90 feet tall and stunningly beautiful. And the instructions were to just look at them and observe them. And it was very uncomfortable for me. But then halfway through, the instructions changed. Look and notice everything you like about this person. And I could see her face change as she was observing what she liked about me. And she had that same experience. And I've been, and when you look at what I think we as humans are very, we're very sensitive. We're picking up on things that are going on with people we're talking to that we're aware of and that we're not. And so there's very little ability for people to, to hide what they're thinking. So we always have a sense of what's going on. But this very act of focusing on what I like about people, and it does not need to be significant, glasses, you have a very nice head of hair, which is something that I tend to notice for
you
some
get a great beard.
reason. Oh, thank you.
I can't grow a beard like that.
Yeah, it's compensating for my lack of hair, but
right.
yeah. But by doing that, it fundamentally changed the relationship. And what I found, and I would do it I started off just in sales meetings and things like that, but it got to the point where I was doing it all the time. And the result is the most profound conversations with people on the subway, in line at the market, just in random places, all because I was looking at what I liked about people and making that connection, and they felt it and they responded to it. And I am constantly overwhelmed by just the humanity of that people are willing to share with me just for opening that small door. And so it is such an immense desire that people have, and we don't know how to do it. Yeah.
As a young person, I mean, I grew up in a family that went to church, and church experience was a positive experience for me. It's always been. Whether I fit into that as a minister or not, that's another story. But it was always a positive thing, and I was always bothered by the level of judgment that went on, not just in churches, but in the world at large. And somewhere early on, I came to this sense that, in the Gospels, Jesus says, "Judge lest you be judged." And I said, "So okay, I'm not going to sit in judgment of people because I'm not walking in their shoes. I'm not living inside their body, so I don't really know." But that wasn't enough to say I'm not going to judge, because of course I'm going to judge, because I'm human. But
That's what we do.
became a tool for me is I'm going to put Jesus between me and every individual that I meet, and I'm going to seek to see that person as Jesus sees them, and what is it that Jesus loves about them? Because that to me becomes the defining thing. And so that's what has emerged and why this podcast matters, because every person that comes on here has something really important and valuable to say. And the joy that I have is having them say it. And it really, I was sitting in a bar back in March watching the NCAA tournament, and this guy came in, and he's a corporate finance guy, and we were talking. I was telling about the podcast. He says, "Well, what kind of people do you bring on your podcast?" I says, "Just anybody." And then I turned and I just swept my arm across the whole room, and I said, "Everyone in here would be an ideal guest on the podcast, because they all, regardless of who they are, they all have something to say that's worth hearing, and it's worth to affirm them in them saying it." And that's really the secret, I think, about underlying all of this is we have to see each other, like you were saying. What is it I like about them? What is it that I love about them? What is it that I want to affirm about them? What is it that I see as something valuable that is worth elevating, so that they see that their lives really actually do matter? That's where we're headed. That is where we're headed, I believe. And our children and our grandchildren are going to teach us how to do that.
I am learning a tremendous amount from my daughter. Yeah, so I would agree. And if I'm so lucky to have to be gifted with a grandchild, I know that will be quite an education for me.
Yes, it will.
Yeah.
Well, Peter, it's been great to have you here, and I look forward to talking with you again. And I look forward to hosting you in my house someday to do some storytelling. That would be so cool. That would be so cool. Oh my! I just got my head spinning. So, but thank you, and I wish you well on this journey that you and your wife are going to take. And
we're very excited. Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. Yeah.
It will be. Well, thank you everyone for watching. Please sign up, hit the like button, and most importantly, give us a comment, because when you give us your comment, you're engaging with us in the conversation that we're having, and I can tell you it always matters. It really does matter. So thank you for watching, and thank you, Peter. Good to see you, and we'll see you again. And thank you all, and see you next time here on the Eddy Network podcast. Bye-bye.